For 300 years after they first appeared on European battlefields, firearms were, let's be honest, objectively terrible. They were laughably inaccurate, agonizingly slow to load, and just as likely to explode in your face as they were to hit an enemy. A trained English longbowman could fire 10, maybe 12 well-aimed arrows in the time a musketeer could barely manage to load and fire a single, wildly unpredictable shot. A good suit of plate armor, the absolute peak of personal defense, could actually deflect an early musket ball. In a one-on-one fight, a skilled swordsman would cut down a musketeer before they could even get their clumsy weapon ready. So why on earth did every major army deliberately switch to this inferior weapon? Why abandon centuries of martial tradition built on the skill of the archer and the courage of the knight for a tool that was, for all practical purposes, worse? The answer has almost nothing to do with firepower and everything to do with a hidden economic advantage that would not only change warfare forever, but would tear down an entire social order. Section 1. The Battlefield Paradox. A truly terrible weapon. To really get the puzzle here, you have to appreciate just how dreadful early firearms were. If you handed a 16th century matchlock musket to a modern soldier, they'd probably think it was a useless liability. The biggest issue was accuracy, or the total lack of it. While specific figures vary, tests on historical smoothbore muskets consistently show what soldiers knew at the time. Hitting a man-sized target at 100 meters was little more than a coin toss, even in ideal conditions. Shots scattered in a wide, almost random pattern. For comparison, a modern rifle can achieve nearly 100% accuracy under the same conditions. This wasn't just poor craftsmanship. The problem was baked right into the design. The barrels were smooth, not rifled, meaning the round lead ball would literally rattle its way down the barrel and fly out with an unpredictable spin. This causes the ball to veer off path in a way that's impossible to predict or correct for. No matter how well made the musket, this flaw was inherent. On top of that, the round balls were aerodynamically awful and lost their speed and power over very short distances. This is why commanders consistently ordered their men to hold their fire until the enemy was dangerously, uncomfortably close. Then there was the rate of fire. A 16th century matchlock musketeer was caught in a slow, cumbersome dance. The loading process was a complex drill that was incredibly difficult to pull off under the stress of battle. You had to measure and pour gunpowder down the barrel, ram a lead ball on top, pour a finer powder into a priming pan, attach a slow-burning cord called a match to a mechanical arm, and then finally pull the trigger. Best case scenario, a trained soldier might manage 2 or 3 rounds a minute. Compare that to an English longbowman who could loose a dozen arrows in the same time, each aimed with precision honed over a lifetime, or even a crossbowman whose weapon required less training than a longbow, but still offered better accuracy and penetrating power than an early musket. And if it rained, a damp powder pan or a wet match cord made the gun completely useless, while an archer could just keep shooting. So the question gets sharper. This wasn't just a new technology with a few bugs, it was a demonstrably worse weapon. So why did it win? Section 2. The myth of technological progress. The simple answer, the one we often assume, is that technology always moves forward. We picture a straight line where the gun slowly got better until it was obviously superior to the sword or bow. But that's not what history shows. For centuries, the gun didn't get significantly better. Testing has shown that the accuracy of smoothbore firearms didn't meaningfully improve between the 16th and 18th centuries. Rifling existed, yes, and it did improve accuracy, but it made the already slow loading process even slower and was far more expensive. So for a long time, it was mostly reserved for specialist hunters and skirmishers, not the rank-and-file infantry. The replacement of the bow wasn't a gradual evolution. It was a sudden, decisive abandonment. In the places where archers were still a key part of the military, like England, they were phased out remarkably quickly once muskets became widely available. This happened while the musket was still at its most flawed, not after it had been perfected. This tells us the reason for the switch wasn't about the weapon's individual performance. The decision wasn't made on the battlefield. It was made in the counting houses and war rooms of kings and finance ministers. It was a strategic, economic calculation that fundamentally changed what an army was. To find the real reason guns replaced swords, we have to stop looking at the technology and start looking at the system that wielded it. Section 3. The investigation. Scalability over skill. The firearms victory is the story of the death of the warrior and the birth of the soldier. Before the gun, military power was built on intense, lifelong skill. The two most formidable figures on the medieval battlefield were the knight and the professional archer, and both were incredibly expensive and took a very long time to create. Take the English longbowman, the terror of French knights for 100 years. This wasn't a peasant handed a bow before a battle. He was a highly specialized, almost superhuman weapon system. His journey began around age 7. English law actually mandated archery practice, and a boy would start with a small bow, learning the form and building muscle memory. By his late teens, if he was destined for war, he'd be strong enough to draw a true war bow with a draw weight of 120 to 150 pounds. This was more than just practice, it was a physical transformation. Skeletal remains of longbowmen show bodies deformed by their trade, overdeveloped left arms, thickened bone in their shoulders and wrists, and even spinal curvature from the constant, immense force. This was a level of physical conditioning that had to start in childhood. You couldn't just take a 30-year-old farmer and turn him into a war archer. It was biologically impossible. An entire culture was needed to produce a single generation of these men. Now, contrast that with the musketeer. How long to train someone to be a functional part of a musket line? While becoming a disciplined soldier took time, a recruit could be taught the basic mechanics of how to load and fire a musket in a matter of weeks. That was the revolution. The skills were purely mechanical. It didn't require special strength or years of conditioning. You could take a peasant from his field, a baker from his shop, or a criminal from a cell, and within a few weeks, you had a soldier. He wasn't a great soldier, mind you, but he was a soldier, and you could make thousands of him almost overnight. This was the hidden advantage. The gun was a weapon that made elite lifelong skill optional. Section 4. The revelation. The economics of attrition. This shift from skill to scalability changed the entire math of warfare. A king's power was no longer limited by how many skilled warriors he could cultivate over a generation. It was now limited only by the number of bodies he could press into service and the number of muskets his armories could produce. Suddenly, armies could be expanded to a previously unimaginable size. States could wage campaigns that would have been completely unsustainable before, knowing they could easily replace their losses. For the first time, a state could grow its military at a rate faster than its own population. This created an economic tipping point. Imagine you're a 16th century ruler. Your rival just adopted the musket and is raising an army of 20,000 men. Your army is made of 10,000 highly skilled archers and knights. Your soldiers are individually far superior. But you can't be everywhere at once. Your enemy can split his massive army, threatening you on multiple fronts, and he can absorb losses that would shatter your elite force. If you lose 2,000 archers, you've lost 2 decades of investment. If he loses 5,000 musketeers, he can have 5,000 more trained and on the field in a matter of months. The choice became brutally simple. Either hold on to your superior, skill-based army and face inevitable defeat by a larger, more expendable force, or adopt the same strategy. You had to accept an individually worse weapon in exchange for the ultimate strategic advantage, scalability. This is why the bow vanished so quickly. It wasn't because the gun got better. It was because the economic model of an archer-based military became impossible when your enemies could field twice the men for a fraction of the cost. War was no longer just a contest of skill. It was a contest of industrial and economic capacity. Section 5. The implications. A new world forged by fire. The consequences of this shift were profound. The decline of the skilled warrior meant the decline of the aristocratic class that produced him. The knight, whose social standing was based on his personal martial prowess, found himself rendered obsolete. He was still a leader, but his role as the decisive force on the battlefield was over. A cheap piece of lead could now fell a nobleman in an instant, bypassing a lifetime of training. This technological transition had a huge cultural impact. In the classic film Seven Samurai, set in Japan around 1586, the samurai immediately identify the bandits' few firearms as the most dangerous weapons they face. They make it their top priority to neutralize the gunmen, understanding that these weapons changed all the rules. In the end, 3 of the 4 samurai who die are killed by gunshots, a testament to the firearms' power to level the playing field. The transition wasn't instantaneous, however. For centuries, soldiers often carried both a sword and a pistol. They were tools for different situations. A soldier might fire their pistol at close range and then draw their sword for the melee that followed. Swords in various forms remained in use alongside firearms for a very long time. In fact, for some military branches, the sword remained a relevant weapon well into the modern era. Cavalry units, whose role often involved chasing down fleeing enemies, still carried swords into the early 20th century, including during the Second Anglo-Boer War. But their primacy was fading fast. The overarching strategic reality was undeniable. The gun allowed for the creation of vast, centrally controlled standing armies funded by national taxation. This was the foundation of the modern nation-state. Power was consolidated away from regional nobles and into the hands of the central government, the only entity that could afford to fund and equip these massive new armies. The world of individual heroism gave way to a world of disciplined firing lines and anonymous soldiers. Conclusion. So why did guns take 300 years to replace swords? The question is framed the wrong way. Guns didn't replace swords and bows because they became better weapons. They replaced them because they enabled a better army. An army that was cheaper, larger, more scalable, and ultimately more expendable. The decision wasn't technological, it was economic. For 3 centuries, the individual soldier was often armed with an inferior weapon, but he was part of a vastly superior military system. The gun's true innovation wasn't its firepower, it was its simplicity. It was a weapon that, in a sense, democratized warfare, stripping it of the artistry and lifelong dedication it once required. It allowed states to build armies not from a small, elite class of warriors, but from the entire breadth of their populations. Guns didn't win because they were better weapons. They won because they made the old way of war obsolete, transforming it from a contest of skill into a grim contest of logistics and attrition. This principle, where scalability can trump individual quality, shows up again and again throughout history, not just in war, but in industry and technology. What modern examples can you think of where a worse but more scalable solution won out over a superior alternative? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy untangling the hidden forces that shape our world, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.